Hi, everyone. Welcome back to Woman's Splain. Today, we're going to cover a topic at Sola's Fave. We're going to talk about restaurants and food. Fun fact, she also has a food blog, No Mo Salads. Feel free to email womansplainpod1@gmail.com if you need restaurant recs, because all of mine come from Sola.
I got you. Yes, this is a topic that is near and dear to my heart, and everyone probably listening who lives in New York City, because getting a reservation these days at any restaurant is insanity. So we can definitely talk about the market, why it's so crowded. I can give you some tips on making reservations. We can talk about some of the new restaurants that are coming up, celebrity chefs, and how people can really leverage, the connections in terms of past track record and seeing like new restaurants that are coming up. And then there's also a lot of really cool restaurant tech apps and startups in the space that, we can definitely dive into.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think generally, I think the craziest part of just being in the New York food scene is no matter what, I feel like there's a new restaurant around every corner. There's constant turnover, in all honesty, especially in like high demand areas like the West Village, and it's super hard to make it, but it's also somehow extraordinarily exclusive and difficult to get a reservation. And generally too, with inflation and food costs going up, it's so much more difficult now for restaurants to make a good margin. The margins are down at least 1%. So what is still driving these new crazy decadent New York restaurants to come out?
Yeah, I honestly think it really boomed after COVID. Post-pandemic, consumer spending on, these activities related to food, alcohol, and any, social activity has gone up 11%, and it's continuing to go up. And I think a lot of that has to be with the fact that, we were quarantining for whatever, a couple of years, but also a lot of these up and coming type of restaurants and the need to signify wealth and status and exclusivity that we talked about. I think a lot of restaurants are playing on that and doing really well. And that's definitely their type of strategy to get these customers in the door. You mentioned that there's a lot of turnover with restaurants, so it is really interesting to just see what kind of restaurants make it, what really attracts customers, and what kind of tactics they use to do so. So, I mean, we can talk a little bit about like the surge of, the demand and new restaurants. I think a lot of really hot new restaurants right now are part of a restaurant group. Or are sister restaurants to already established restaurants in the city. So something that, that just opened maybe a month ago now, it's San Sabino. It's part of the Quality Restaurant Group. You guys will definitely know Don Angie, which is still insanely hard to get a reservation. Pro tip, go at like 4, write your name down, and then you can pick whichever time you want to dine. San Sabino, same kind of situation. But they opened around a month ago. They didn't do too much marketing at all. But it was kind of like, if you know, you know. Like, I knew of the opening a couple months ago. They had a soft opening. But even so, reservations were out completely the first week. Now you can dine, at 10:30 or 11 p.m., which, I mean, if you want to, you definitely should. But that's also an example of a restaurant being a part of a restaurant group and really leveraging the name, and also leveraging a sister restaurant that is also very popular. They'll probably also get a star. I don't think anytime soon, but it's definitely coming. Another restaurant is Bangkok Supper Club. It's in the Village. It's a Thai restaurant. It's a sister restaurant of Fish Cheeks. That one I think is definitely going to get a star soon. Mark my words. We'll see.
The Soul approves this message,
yes,
guys.
Exactly.
No, I know. I mean, I feel like that's such a large variety, and I do totally see what you mean in terms of the trend around sister restaurants. Do you think it's just so much more difficult for new restaurateurs to enter this space now?
Yeah, exactly. I totally think that. And I think it's like a lot of gaining momentum when you first open by luring in customers with whatever is hot these days. So like, for example, Simon Kim, the owner, opened a sister restaurant called Coco Duck. It actually means like cock-a-doodle-doo in Korean. Fun fact. But when they open, it's a scene and a half. You go in there, but it's only fried chicken. So it's like they really took this food that isn't very sexy and turned it into this really exclusive thing. And what they did really well is, I mean, every restaurant, I think these days, like adds caviar, and that, adds that allure of exclusivity and status. And so they do this thing where it's like a chicken nugget with caviar, just one nugget. It's $28. But people buy it. People come, people line up for it. And it's just really interesting to turn something that isn't really sexy. And like, if you have this addition of an ingredient or the vibe of the restaurant that is quote unquote sexy, then you can definitely, attract a lot of customers. But it's really awesome. I think another really cool trend is seeing a lot of New York City restaurants opening in other cities. We talked a little bit about this when we talked about exclusivity, but a ton of New York City restaurants in Miami. I was there last weekend. Literally, Sadel's, Pastis, Cote opened a couple months ago. Lucali, Hasselad, just every single New York City restaurant, it's down there. So I wonder if like that is, I mean, that's definitely good in terms of scaling for the business, but does that kind of detract from the exclusivity bit that we talked about? It's definitely a different market, but I think like these restaurants should definitely consider, that when they're looking at their growth plans. But super interesting.
I mean, I think it's really interesting that Lucali would choose to open a restaurant in Miami instead of a second one in New York or Brooklyn.
Yeah.
Right? Like you're like kind of like that's a really interesting strategy where I feel like it's almost like they want to keep the allure of exclusivity in New York City, where they want the same level of demand and obsession in New York. And they basically are like these New York influencers, New York TikTok stars, New York celebrities are driving this allure to the rest of the country.
Yeah.
We're like, okay, like, yeah, let's open in Miami. It's like New Yorkers are still dying to go and it goes viral on TikTok.
Yeah.
And then people in Miami will absolutely follow because they kind of see as New York as like the food trendsetters. And they don't want that to kind of like infect that fake sort of like idea where like all these restaurants are obviously amazing. But it's like so difficult to get a reservation, and so it adds to it. And I wonder if that's why.
Yeah, and that's interesting that you said that about Lucali because it's, in Brooklyn, and
it's also such a random one to be in Miami. It does not seem to track. Like exactly. I feel like I'm like, okay, I'm like all the other ones I'm like, yeah, for sure. Like it fits. Like of course there's a Carbone's, there's gonna be like a bunch of other food group restaurants. Like of course there's Sadel's, of course there's Cote. Like that is very much the Miami vibe. Yeah. But I'm like Lucali, like what? I'm like, that's like a chill Brooklyn pizza spot that's like walk-in only, like, no, exactly. Right? Like, what? I'm like, why is that going to Miami? Why didn't they just open up a spot in the East Village?
Yeah,
like,
exactly.
It doesn't make any sense.
Which is happening right now. I think there's a pizza brand called Mama's too, which is in the Upper West Side, and it just opened in the West Village.
And that makes sense.
And there's a ton of traction.
Yeah.
Pop-up Bagel is also opening on the Upper East Side, apparently.
Oh my God, I saw that they're doing a what is it called? A collab with Dominique Ansel.
Yes.
That was so weird. Like I thought that was so strange. Or like the garlic bagel and then the oh God, what is it called? Like the snails. What are they called? With an F. Whatever, like literally snail sauce. Like yeah. Like so crazy.
Yeah. But it's also crazy because Pop-Up is also opening in LA, or I think it already opened in LA.
Oh, interesting.
So the crossover, and I feel like LA and like New York don't really mix that well. I know there's like a couple of restaurants, like Julina actually just opened a year ago on Bond Street, and then they had a fire, so they had to actually close down, which is really sad. But hopefully they open again. But that's like a very LA-esque restaurant.
I mean, besides like a big chains like Nobu or something. Yeah. I can't really think of something that's like even like Erewhon hasn't come to New York.
No.
I think if something does usually come to LA, it's usually New York to LA, not LA to New York, which is also interesting. And I'm also curious about that. I mean, I think LA obviously is a big restaurant scene, but I think it's different than New York and Miami, clearly, because Miami is the chosen spot to open a second spot.
Yeah.
Which I wonder if it's more like LA has less obsession with like restaurant exclusivity. Yeah. If honestly, LA is so spread out, people don't tend to go to new restaurants all the time. New York, you can easily bop around or try walking in, and I wonder if it's more about that.
I think that's true because I know there's a lot of, like very chill restaurants in LA, but also like the crazy influencer-y type of places like Nobu you talked about. And I know Delilah, which is a club in LA, opened in Miami recently.
Really?
And I learned about that when I was there. And I was thinking, I was like, it doesn't make sense that it would open in New York, but it kind of makes sense that it would open in Miami.
Yeah.
So there's like these nuances between these coastal cities that, you really have to know the clientele and the market to know where to open and be successful.
For sure. And like Miami and LA definitely have more in common than LA and New York too.
Yeah.
Which I feel like as Miami is like the bridge.
Right.
Even though Miami also has its own thing going on too. So that's super interesting. I also think all of the vast majority of these new restaurants are coming up. Obviously, sister restaurants usually have an established area, but they are also really like, they are not like the chill corner spot. They are not a place for regulars. Like they are huge, like circus, like performative. Like they are big, like, very flashy, influencery things. Yeah. Do you think that's like the only way restaurants can make it? Do you think it's like adjusting post-pandemic? What do you think is causing that?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of it has to do with the rise in social media. So pre-COVID, I don't think food influencing was a thing, really. I think during COVID, a lot of these influencers went on these platforms and started talking about food. And then once things were opening, they were going in and supporting. And a lot of these restaurants were inviting people in because they needed more customers. And it's really fascinating because even in like mid and late 2020, when restaurants were opening, that's when I started doing, the food influencing. And then now it's just very different because this is the norm. Like restaurants don't spend money on marketing. They spend money on influencer marketing. So what they do is invite these influencers in. And then a lot of PR companies are born out of this too. A ton of PR agencies, restaurant groups would, email these influencers, 100% comp their food. Sometimes they even pay these, creators depending on their following. And this is how marketing works because you trust the people that you vaguely know. And if you're, watching these people's stories, you feel like you know them. So it's really fascinating because let's say, even like if you don't even have a following, let's say like Brooke, you just post on your Instagram that you went to Turisi. You have a couple thousand followers on your Instagram, lots of them your friends. And then even like if 10 people go, that's 10 more than, before. So I think for these restaurants, that's something that they're really targeting. And it's a huge market now. There's a ton of New York City creators that do this full time, and you can totally make a living and more. And it's not just restaurants that are inviting you in. It's all these brands that are asking to collaborate with you. You could do a brand with Coca-Cola, post one video, and then, they'll see their sales go up. I did a deal with Haichu recently, which I actually haven't had Haichu in so long, but like I used to love it growing up. And of course, like I do restaurants, that's not really exactly aligned, but I love the product. So, I did that deal, and I'm sure they'll see some sort of uptick in sales. So it's definitely all these like creative ways of marketing that I find super interesting that was non-existent, I think, pre-pandemic and pre like TikTok and social media.
I think that's so interesting too. So when they are inviting influencers in, like let's say they comp their meal, whatever, are influencers like required to give a positive review?
No. I mean, it depends. Like some restaurant groups and restaurants, I mean, it's like 99% by PR companies. So they work with a ton of restaurants. So they'll have some guidelines here and there. But pro tip, if you see a video of, an influencer and they talk about like, oh, like the vibes were great. I loved the drinks, like loved the service. They probably didn't like the food. And I'm being super honest here. Because like at the end of the day, like you definitely should post about it. It's not like 100% required, but you should post about it. And a lot of the times, like I feel like all these influencers will probably pick and choose which restaurants they want to go to, unless you're starting out. So like for me, like I'm super busy with, work and stuff. So I choose which restaurants I want to go into depending on, oh, it's somewhere that I definitely want to go that I can't make a reservation, or, oh, it's like a mom and pop shop that I would love to explore. So I think like there's definitely some upside in this to boost the local economy for sure.
Totally. I mean, it's way cheaper way more accessible. I mean, it's way more accessible for like a small restaurateur to start out to basically just give a free meal for promotion than to pay a huge marketing agency that could completely fail. So it's actually way cheaper cost and probably way higher return on investment. And also probably builds more loyal following. So it's honestly great in terms of that. I think the only question, but honestly, obviously marketing agencies aren't exactly ethical either. I guess it's, you know, like where is sort of like the real critics and like critique that's sort of like kind of disappeared, right? And if you really don't like something, it's hard to actually post honestly about it because it'll hurt 1000%. You and it'll hurt them. It'll hurt your relationships probably like in the ecosystem. And so I think that's really difficult. And so I guess it's like, I mean, obviously New York restaurants are on the whole, like so high quality, honestly. But I do question that where I'm like, can we really trust influencers who are being effectively paid to post?
1000%. And I think a lot of the times, like, influencers definitely go through that dilemma too. And like myself as well. And like sometimes I just don't post at all. You know? Or I never say anything negative unless it was like an awful experience, which like that's never happened to me if I'm ever invited in. But if I don't have anything, you know, raving to say, I just won't post about it because you're not really required to. And I think that's, even though this exists, I think that is exactly the reason why something like the New York Times, like Pete Wells, for example, is still, you know, really active. He recently just put out 100 best New York City restaurants. He did it last year. He put it out again this year. And what I like about that also is that he's unbiased. He never gets paid. People don't know
who he is.
Pete Wells. And he also went to all 5 boroughs and really covered a lot of these mom and pop local restaurants. I feel like over half of the 100 restaurants is outside of Manhattan, which is really incredible. And there's a lot of, you know, creators that really focus on that kind of stuff in terms of like boosting local economy. So, you know, when you're following creators, you can definitely kind of pick up on, you know, their vibe and depending on what they cover and how they cover it. So it's definitely like a good way to discover new restaurants for sure.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's so many you would never hear of. And I think like, honestly, like I love that it brings attention to local restaurants you would never know of. Like absolutely. And that like, it really does like, it does like drive like real meritocracy and success of just quality of food sometimes, which I think is amazing. And honestly, like that's where I get like, well, besides for Sola, like all of my recs, like I've discovered a really awesome place, especially traveling too. It's great. Like I've like if you're new and going to a new city, like it's a great way to actually explore. Versus like I feel like there are just, you know, cities that are less covered in terms of restaurant scenes like New York, and so I think that's awesome too.
And like on that note, there's been a lot of new startups and apps in this space. So one that I wanted to touch on is called Belly. BLI. I'm such a loyal user. I've been on it since beta. It's awesome. It's basically a restaurant discovery and recommendation app. So you rank all the restaurants that you've been to. They use AI to recommend new restaurants to you. And it's like a Yelp meets Google Maps. So it's also a social component as well. You can see where your friends have been to, what they rank, where they want to go. So like there's a lot new, you know, startups in that space. And I think that one was the first of its kind. And now I know there's a ton of new apps like that. So there's definitely a lot of market in terms of venture too. Maybe we can have the founders on here because they're awesome.
Yeah, that'd be amazing. That'd be a great one.
But lots of capital in this space that hasn't really been tapped because the big, you know, players in this market are Yelp.
Infatuation.
Which
isn't an app. You know what I'm saying? It's more like it's a blog. I would call it a blog. Or like, exactly.
I think that's Eater. It's all like publications and like reservation platforms.
Totally.
But there's no really big discovery and recommendation app other than Yelp. So there's lots of white space here that, you know, founders can tap into when they're, you know, thinking about their next big idea. Especially in a market like New York.
Yeah, absolutely. That's such a great point. And I think it's the same thing too with sort of food and beverage, like CPG startups. And there's also no really discovery app there, where I feel like there's like a million new, like, I don't know, recess like drinks. There's a million coffee like drinks. There's a million like, I don't know, new low whatever, Halo Top type ice cream, whatever. I would love to actually see an app in those CPG startup areas too. That's a really good idea. Because like, so interesting. I mean, obviously like Kim Kardashian buying Truff, and I feel like there's actually so much white space even in the spice area. Like literally going to Whole Foods, I'm like, what even is this stuff? Half of it's private equity owned. Like literally, which is insane. Like lines of barbecue sauces that are like actually super hot in the investment space. It'd actually be really good to have like a discovery analyzer app in there too.
Yeah, no, that's awesome.
And I love that also with the new startups. I feel like they totally took away a lot of power from like these huge CPG manufacturing, like Johnson & Johnson honestly owned literally everything. Coca-Cola owned literally everything. I love that like these niche sort of CPG players are able to do well, make money, and get investment. I think that's totally new.
Yeah. And a lot of them are female owned. Like
a lot
Poppy.
of them are female owned. Yeah. And like there's a lot of alcohol brands as well.
Yeah.
And like healthy snacks, etc.
Yeah. It's a huge market.
It's a huge market. It's awesome.
Cool. Well, I could go on and on about this stuff, but maybe some parting wisdom, I guess, in terms of being able to make reservations. This is just years of experience living on Resi, but I would, just be on Notify all the time. Find out when the restaurants are opening reservations, go on it. It honestly works better sometimes if you email or call them. And if you're willing to eat, at odd hours of the day, that definitely is the way to go. Definitely line up. I mean, I love lining up and, doing this stuff because I love food, but it's definitely worth it if it's like a hot new restaurant. There's also like all these apps where you can get reservations. I don't know how, regulated they'll be moving forward, but, apps like ResX, Dorsia, which I think that's also a huge market for sure. But I'd be surprised to see how it's, regulated. Yeah. What is one closing question for Sola? What is one restaurant right now you're dying to go to? Oh my gosh, this is so hard. Superiority Burger. Oh my God. I haven't been. It is a vegan burger shop. It just reopened in the East Village. It's on my mind because Noma Projects was here this week. They're doing a little tour. It's like the ingredients brand of Noma, which is the best restaurant in the world in Copenhagen. And I actually met the team yesterday, but they had an event at Superiority. Awesome. Which is, I definitely want to try it. But there's always a line there too. But apparently if you go at like midnight, you can get in and it's a vibe. So that's awesome. That's awesome. That's amazing. Well, if you have a favorite restaurant that you want to go to or any suggestions, DM us at Women's Plain Pod or email us womensplainpod1@gmail.com. And thanks so much for listening. Stay hungry. Get some great food. Yes. And we'll see you guys soon. See you soon.